So we had three breakout questions on the table. The first one being, what is the contemporary analysis of the reading? What was your contemporary analysis of the reading? Excuse me. Second one being, what new understandings did you gain about Harriet Tubman from the reading? And then finally, how did the legacy of Harriet Tubman inform your understandings on intersectionality? Who would like to start us off? So what's the contemporary analysis for anyone, or you're discussing your breakout groups? All right. Alexis, what did your group discuss as far as your contemporary analysis for the reading?
What my group discussed was that for the contemporary analysis is, first of all, we did not know about Tubman. What I have not learned or heard of her in any history class that I had. And so that's something that we pointed out. And then the second contemporary analysis was that there's other women who are not mentioned in education or in history class that should be mentioned. And Tubman was just one of the many women that represent those legacies.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Great call out. Anyone else want to speak to the contemporary analysis or new understandings they gained about Harriet Tubman from the reading?
I could go. I'm in my 30s, so I kind of have an idea of who she was growing up. And for me, it was sort of like a refresher. There were some new facts that I was unaware about, like the disability, for example, how she got that as an adolescent, but still leading the way. And I mentioned to my group members that she was sort of like the sacrificial lamb to make all the sacrifices for everyone to kind of escape, so to speak.
Good call out. Thank you, Harlan. Anyone else? We talk about what's new understandings you gained from Harriet Tubman, or we could discuss this notion of intersectionality.
The new understanding was of that the roles that Harriet Tubman had after, well, the more roles she had than just the Underground Railroad, because at school they didn't really teach us more about her history, besides the importance in the Underground Railroad, right? So I found that very interesting.
Yes, good call out. Kaden, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, one thing, it was just one short thing that I know they described her as quote unquote illiterate, like an illiterate woman who couldn't read or write, but she had the ability to read the world, like from curing sickness with her knowledge of medicines and through her knowing of astronomy.
Perfect. Good call out. Yeah.
I have something too, sir. I didn't know she was a Civil War veteran and a nurse. All these things like community organizer, woman suffragist, border crossing immigrant, and yeah, those are all something that I learned as new.
So let's talk a little bit about this notion or this idea of intersectionality. I believe I spoke about it briefly or in passing within this class. I could be wrong. I got so many classes I teach. Sometimes I get that shit confused. Who is unfamiliar with this notion or this term intersectionality? Who would need like a definition provided? Okay. So Alexis, when you think about intersectionality, is strongly tied up within this term called positionality, right? And your positionality kind of determines your position in life, right? And that could be things like your gender, your religious background, right? Your class status, right? So for me, my positionality is I'm a Black man growing up in the western part of the United States, right? I come from an upper middle class background, right? I am non-religious, right? I practice an African spiritual tradition. So these are all of the things that make up my positionality, right? And they all form the way that I look at and I view and I assess what's happening in the world, right? But when you talk about intersectionality, it's the same thing, but then it's also like these modes of oppression, right? Because we exist in the Western world. The Western world is capitalistic. The Western world is racist. The Western world is misogynist, right? The Western world is homophobic, right? The Western world is predominantly Protestant, right? So they're looking at these Christian values and things of that nature, right? So when you're thinking about your intersectionality, so for myself, right, because I'm a man in a patriarchal society, I'm on the dominant end of that spectrum, right? But I'm also Black. So from a racial standpoint, I'm at the bottom end of that spectrum, right? So that's where my intersection lies. Now, in a homophobic world, I'm heterosexual, so that places me at the dominant end of that spectrum, right? So that's also where my intersection lies. I'm not Christian, so from the religious standpoint, that puts me bottom of that run, right? So this is how this notion of intersectionality comes into play. So if you're thinking about Harriet Tubman, right, you're thinking about the work that she's done on the Underground Railroad, which is predominantly what? In the standpoint of intersectionality, right? Underground Railroad is handling what form of identity? That deals with what? I'm asking all of y'all, right? And it's not just Alexis, but when we're thinking about the Underground Railroad and who she's trying to liberate and what they're trying to liberate them from, what identity does that classify?
Like Black people and people who are enslaved.
Right. So race, from that standpoint, we're dealing with race, right? So when we think about her work with the women's suffrage movement, what identity does that situate and work with?
Gender and women.
Gender, right? So, and I'm asking you all about the legacy of Harriet Tubman and this notion of intersectionality. What is that, right? So talk to me about that. She's able to serve at these two axes of oppression, that being race and then that being gender, right? That's part of her legacy. That's part of who she is. That's part of why she's important. Why is that significant to y'all? Did y'all get to that part of the discussion in the breakout groups at all?
I feel like it's because she came from so many aspects where she was challenged, like with her disability, obviously her being a woman, her being Black, and it just shows that she still advocated for, equality. So showing like where she came from and like how much she did and how much she impacted like the entire world as an out. Everyone I know, like when I grew up, I didn't go to school with the US education system, so I don't know, but Harriet Tubman was speaked about or taught a lot, just because I think she is so important in that aspect.
Where did you go to school, Olivia?
Oh, I went to different schools. I moved like every couple of years. So not in the US though.
Or
Huh?
like out of the country?
Yeah, out of the country.
So like where? Just out of curiosity.
I went to school in Holland, Panama, Bahrain, Mexico, Italy, and Morocco.
So like out of those locations, which ones were talking about Harriet Tubman?
That was usually it was actually in my school in Mexico because I was 3rd to 7th grade.
And the only reason I asked that, like, that's fascinating to me, right? Like, Mexico would talk about the legacy of Harriet Tubman, and really, like, her movement didn't really go through Mexico, right? Like,
Yeah.
the didn't really impact Mexican history by and large, right? But they have the sense enough to talk about her. And, for us who grew up within the United States, you have very minimal depiction of Harriet Tubman. I think like Harlan, we're kind of closer in the same age bracket. So it's talked about a little bit more in our upbringing, but even that is very cursory. It's not in-depth, detailed, engagement with who she was, So I find that fascinating. All right. So to slide into the lecture, and just pulling from the reading itself, and I forgot who pointed out, it might have been Martin, but I could be wrong, but this notion of her being illiterate, right? It states in the article, first page, she's often described as an illiterate woman who could neither read nor write. However, her abilities to read, and they put that in quotations, right? The world from curing sicknesses with her knowledge of herbal medicines to navigating the natural terrain via the night sky through her knowledge of astronomy remain key in escaping and rescuing others from enslavement. So I think one, I kind of want to like deal with this notion of read and how they put that under quotation marks to kind of situate or kind of highlight this notion that, you know, there's various forms of literacy, right? She may not have been able to pick up a book and read what's on the pages of that book, but she has the science of plants, right? And she knows what plant to use to help cure specific diseases, right? If we think back to the earlier in the semester when we talk about the Dogon and their ability to view Sirius star A and Sirius star B with the naked eye, right, from the mountaintop. When you think about in the beginning of the semester, when we talk about the ancient Kemetics and their ability to build these pyramids in alignment with the stars, right? This is what the author of the article is talking about when they talk about her ability to read the stars and read in her astronomical science to allow her to navigate her way up north, right, to freedom. Thinking about even, what was it, the week before last, or was it last week, excuse me, when we talked about they came before Columbus, right? And I say how the ability to read the stars allowed these African peoples to traverse the waters and end up in the Western Hemisphere, right? This is not happenstance, this is not accident, right? This is a type of ability to read the world. And what the author is saying is that, you know, Harriet Tubman had the same ability. She had the same capacity to read the world beyond the standard forms of literacy. Yeah. And then on the third page, it says that, you know, her legacy goes, her roles reach far beyond her most famous one as a conductor of the Underground Railroad, when she made 13 trips to the South and rescued approximately 70 slaves from the plantation system. According to the most recent biographies, she was also a Civil War veteran, nurse, community organizer, women's suffrage, and border crossing migrant. The later role explored by Dan J. Borg in this issue. But I think a few things to unpack, right? Like 13 trips to the South. And I want to use Harriet Tubman as a impetus to introduce this notion of fugitivity, right? This notion of fugitivity is the act of stealing oneself. Because we have to understand, right, in the plantation society, you are property of the one who owns that plantation, right? And so at the moment you get in your head, you get the idea that I want to be free, and you start to take actions to make yourself free, you have become a fugitive. You are stealing yourself because, again, in this context, you're property, right? So in this context, it's no different from going into the store, taking some shit out the store and not paying for it. But the warped part about it, the perverse part about it, is you're stealing yourself. Then you become fugitive. But what's important about fugitivity is not an event. It's not something to where, boom, I made it off the plantation, I'm free now, right? We know better than that. Because we know that once you get off the plantation, who's coming after you? The catchers, the patty rollers, the dogs, right? In fact, the reason why we have policing now, the reason why policing is performed in the way that it is now, the way that policing is understood to this day, is because of the act of bringing the fugitive enslaved back to the plantation. The first police officers were those who were deputized to go bring the runaway enslaved back to the plantation. That's the origins of policing. That's what it is to be the original police officer, right? And it hasn't changed too much, because if you know the amendment, you know the only time that enslavement is legalized is where? Where's the only place on our Constitution that slavery is legal. It says it in the Constitution. You're saying something tomorrow, and I think you're right, but we can't hear you. We can't hear you. You're not muted, so maybe it's your audio. Do me a favor.
Can you repeat the question? Oh, sorry.
Got you. Amara, log out and log back in, and hopefully that'll allow your
The
audio.
prison system.
Bing, that's what
Can
she
you hear
said.
me now?
Yep, perfect. Say that again one more time, please.
The prison system.
So, Kaden, the question was, where is the only place within this country, right, that slavery is legal? And Amar points out perfectly, it's the prison system, right? That's the only place where enslavement is legalized. Now, think about it. I'm telling you that the origins of policing stem from bringing people who run away from the plantation back to the plantation. If you get in the hands of the police, where are you going? To jail, to prison, right? So what I'm saying to you is the nature of policing has not changed since the time of Harriet Tubman. So let's put this into context, right? Like today, like right now, just driving your car, for those who drive, especially if you Black, how hard it is to navigate these streets and avoid the fucking 12, right? That's a difficult circumstance just to get from point A to point B and not get harassed by the police. That's hard, right? Now let's take it to the 1600s, right? Where even your skin color indicates your guilt. And it hasn't changed too much, right? But back in those times, if you got Black skin, chances are you're an enslaved person, right? So much so, if they see you moving about, they're going to ask you for your papers, right? She made 13 trips back and forth. It's mind-boggling to be able to free yourself one time. One time. To make it from the south to the north, one time is a miraculous feat. 13 times? And then bring people back with you? Do you understand the magnitude of that? And here's the thing, like, you kind of pick up some know-how, you pick up some skill when you're doing this multiple times, right? The first time you do something is harder. The second time it gets easier. The third time it gets easier, right? By the 13th time, you got like somewhat of a handle on it, right? But you're taking people with you who have never done this before. So their fear, right? Their fear could get you caught. Their fear could cause a mistake that gets you brought back to the plantation. But not once, not twice, not 3 times, 13 times, successfully. As African people, homie, like we have to give the utmost respect to Mama Moses, Harriet Tubman. For people who appreciate freedom, liberty, and justice, you have to give the utmost homage and respect to Mama Moses. When you talk about like selflessness, right? Not worrying about what's best for you, putting what's best for you aside for the greater good of the collective, that's the quintessential essence of who Mama Moses was. Because let's be real, how many of y'all, when you get out of the fucking worst situation ever, right? The worst situation you could imagine, how many of y'all would be willing to go back to help out someone else 13 times? That's like breaking out of prison, getting to freedom, and going back, breaking back into prison and taking somebody else with you 13 times. Right? But on top of that, right, you don't just do that. You're a Civil War veteran. You're a nurse. You engage in women's suffrage. And then this notion of being a border crossing migrant, right? Because think about it. Not only is she going from the South, right, to the North, but then on to Canada. So it's not even crossing territories within the United States. You're crossing United States borders with contraband, with illegal cargo, right? So what the author is saying, like, we have to even like reduce our scope down to give homage to the fact that she's crossing borders. One of the first people to do so, right? I'm looking at page 4 towards the middle of the page. It says, of course, Tubman herself contributed to this larger-than-life portrait. After attending the NACW convention, Tubman later went on to a women's suffrage meeting in Rochester, New York in November of 1896. Led on stage by Susan B. Anthony, and the elderly Tubman declared to another appreciative audience how I was the conductor of the Underground Railroad for 8 years. And I can say what most conductors can't say. I never ran my train off track and I never lost a passenger. So again, over 8 years, over 13 trips, never lost a passenger, right? No one's never captured on her treks into prison and out, right? In crafting a narrative emphasizing her role as an Underground Railroad conductor, Tubman validated the struggle for women's rights. Moreover, Tubman's story reminded women that if she, a woman, could transgress the race and gender limitations that forbade women from navigating the world and freely crossing the borders between North and South, Canada and the United States, and to do so without a man's help, if she, a woman, can lead a successful battle during the Civil War, then surely women deserve the right to vote and the right to full citizenship. Such a complex history seamlessly weaves women's rights and the rights of African Americans. And right there, we're placed at the forefront of intersectionality, right? Because her argument is twofold, right? So if I, as a woman, right, I'm able to cross these borders, cross into the United States, cross into Canada, cross from the southern hemisphere of the United States into the northern hemisphere of the United States, right? Without the help of a man. In fact, fuck that. Not even without the help of a man, I'm helping men, right? I'm the savior for men, right? So if I could do this in this patriarchal, misogynistic society, then there's no excuse for the capacity of what any woman could do. Let me be the example for the possibilities of womanhood. Let me be the example to show you how idiotic this notion that women can't achieve is. Because look what I achieved, right? But at the same token, this notion that Black folks can't do things, I'm exploding that too, right? My illiterate ass outsmarted all of y'all 13 times and took people with me for 8 years from enslavement to freedom. But Black folks are incapable. But Black folks are inferior, right? So this is what they're saying, that her work sits at these two axes of oppression. And it explodes these notions that limits the capacities of women and limits the capacities of African people. Now I'm going to that. When you ask about a contemporary analysis, right? And I'm looking at page 5 on the first full paragraph of page 5. It says, significantly, Guy Sheftall notes that Tubman's life, as well as the lives of other historical women, need to be felt more concretely in the present. As she suggests, I think we need to talk about their political activism, and we need to talk about the courageousness and struggles, but we also need to talk about their everyday lives and the choices that they've made. And I think that passage is important because they talk about the quotidian, right? The quotidian just means the everyday lives. And I think this becomes a little bit more fascinating when you're talking about Black women than Black men when you're dealing with the quotidian. Because by and large, what makes Black women's everyday lives a lot more fascinating, especially when it pertains to their decision-making in this time, they're mothers, right? So the decision that they have to make can't be strictly from the standpoint of what's good for me. They're also thinking about their children, right? How the choices that they make to feed their children, right? That's an everyday action that is fascinating to me, that when you look at the man's dynamic, because of the patriarchy, they're not really hampered by those quotidian, those everyday decisions, right? This dynamic of motherhood drastically shapes the experiences of African women going through systems of oppression. Yeah, I'm gonna get into that. I'll end my lecture there. We'll open up the fishbowl. You have 2 times the fishbowl per semester. You have 1 time to pass. You could talk about the lecture that we just went over. You could talk about the breakout questions. You could read directly from your journal, or if you have, anything of interest from the reading, you could discuss that as well. Does anyone want to volunteer the fishbowl?
Yeah, I'll fishbowl. I'm gonna talk about the
Give me 1 second,
one
Kate.
of
Let me get 2 other people, and then we'll have you start.
okay. Okay.
Anyone else want to volunteer the fishbowl?
I will volunteer also.
All right, got you. Anyone else? We need 1 more. If not, I'll call somebody at random. Okay, Alexis, perfect. Katie, did you want to start us off?
Yeah. I just wanted to talk about some of the things that I've found interesting while reading. So she helped others gain freedom as a conductor of the Underground Railroad. She also has served as a scout, spy, and a soldier. She led 70 people to freedom, mostly family and friends, she also provided instructions to 50 to 60 others to help escape. And lastly, that she was a supporter of women's rights, but yet her contributions were unnoticed and unrecognized in today's world.
Yeah, good call out. Okay, thank you. Amara or Alexis, who's next?
Go next. So, honestly, to piggyback off of what Kaden said about Harriet Tubman accomplishing so many things, her being such a remarkable African American civil rights leader during her living years, we also get to learn in the readings that a lot of her work went unnoticed and a lot of her intellect was really diminished. The intellect that she did have was even undermined and diminished, by the public or by people who could not find a sense to highlight all the things that she was good at, except for those moments where they were undeniable, where she was at, the front and the center of the public's eye, like her experience with Ida B. Wells and her civil rights marches and any social gatherings where she was asked to participate and just be the head, the face, and the forefront of the crowd. So I honestly think that resonates with a lot of people who are in the public eye today. And we may ask, well, why does this person have this authority? They're not intelligent. Why does this person have this respect or this income level? They didn't go to college, they didn't graduate, or they're rapping or singing about hypersexuality, or they're rapping or they're singing about things that seem to or appear to undermine or diminish the minds of children. But we may not be able to highlight the ways that those people are leaders within their communities or within their families or at work within the industry. So I think that it's a good, insightful message to not criticize each other for what we lack in and the things that we say. I say things that make me appear to be ignorant, and I might just be joking. It might just be a bad joke, even though I'm, very capable intellectually. I think that we got to take it easy on each other and highlight the things that we do.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is like give people race, right? And allow people to be multifaceted, right? I could be intelligent and ratchet, and that's okay, right? To a certain degree. Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to circle back to two things that you said, Amara, but I want to give time for Alexis to kind of comment as well. Go ahead, Alexis. We're ready when you are.
I said, it takes a lot of, I wrote this in my notes, so I put, it takes a lot of courage to do such acts of service. It should be talked about way more, her selfless choices that were made in order to free others and help people who, needed freedom should be praised. When she made her first escape in 1849, she only relied on nature, as we talked about in the lecture, and she used the night and astrology to guide her through the night. And although she was a runaway, didn't hold her back to help others, although she risked her life every second and her freedom as well. And on page, oh my gosh. Oh, page 6, right in the beginning, it says, we must bring history to life and recognize how our own present day perspectives might limit that history. Uh, so I feel like in present day, there's so many things that are connected to this still, like how we talked about policing, it still connects to when people would run away. And another connection I wanted to make was immigration. I personally had an uncle that lived in Tijuana, Mexico, and although he passed away, I think he crossed people for more than 8 years through the ocean, swimming at night, surfing. So when he would tell people, which not a lot of people knew, they would look at him like, well, like you shouldn't be doing that. Like what kind of people are you related to? Like who do you see to every day? But I feel like he gave a better life to so many people, and I feel like that's what Tubman did as well. Like although she risked her life, and although your freedom or going back to Mexico is at risk, you're still being a selfless person and helping others. So that's a connection that we can talk about in present history and connect it back to historic figures like Tubman.
Yeah, Alexis, I think that's a phenomenal call out and like a parallel to draw, right? And kind of thinking about Olivia's comments earlier, where you learned about Harriet Tubman in Mexico, right? Like you take that statement with what Alexis just mentioned, you see a natural connection, right? Like just as Tubman is leading her people north to a better life, your uncle leading people north to a better life as well, right? There's no real difference except the circumstances that the people are in, right? That's an obvious difference, but the act is still the same, right? This type of fugitivity that's being practiced is still the same. Because for me, when I listen to you talk about going through the ocean, right? Think about that from a tactical standpoint, right? You can't trace somebody's scent if you're in the water, right? That water throws all that off. So if you trying to use dogs, once you get into that water, their ability to sniff you out, it gets less and less, right? So that's a tactical move, right? Even oftentimes when you hear about African people who run away, they use that same tactic. Like we're gonna get into this water because it's gonna throw our scent off, right? I think it's a really good fishbowl. You all brought up some very good points. I did want to circle back to Amara's comments with the time that we have left. I want to draw a clear line of distinction. And I think it's something that a lot of people conflate, right? And I think it's a good chance to draw out this distinction. We have civil rights and we have human rights, okay? What is a civil right? What is a civil right? Name for me some civil rights.
The right to not be discriminated against based off of your skin color, sexual preference, disability, things like that, or being a part of a marginalized group.
Okay. Yes, but let's talk about how that plays out, right? What are the forms of discrimination, right? Another way to think about this, what are some of the things that the civil rights movement advocated for? What were some of the things that they're asking to change in the way that our society operates?
Economic equality.
Okay. So the ability to live where you want, right?
Yeah.
What else?
Housing opportunities.
Which one?
I was saying like housing opportunities,
Okay,
education.
housing, right? Desegregated lunch counters, right? We can eat where we so choose, right? Desegregating the schools. We could go to school where we so choose, right? So what I'm trying to get you to understand, civil rights are about your civic abilities, your ability to exist as a citizen, right?
Yeah.
Disenfranchised because I cannot vote like other citizens of this country can vote, right? It's a civil right. Now, what's a human right? What are human right violations?
The right to safety, the right to basic necessities like food, clothing, and shelter.
The right,
And not being deprived of those things, basic necessities.
the right to maintain your overall functioning humanity. Once that gets infringed upon, your human rights are violated. Amar is absolutely right. Food, access to food is a human right. But because we're in a capitalist society, we say that you have to have access to capital to give you access to food. And this is why that gets ossified, right? But you're right. Food is a human right.
What do
So
you mean by ossified, Professor?
like murky, right? Like
okay, I understand.
So the difference between human right and civil rights, Harriet Tubman was not dealing with civil rights. If you're enslaved, your human rights are being infringed upon, right? Her whole platform was to give African people human rights outside of the system of enslavement, right? That's vastly different from the idea or the notion of where I could eat, where I could go to school, where I could buy a house. Because if you're not human, they don't give a fuck where you eat.
Yeah.
If you eat or not, I don't care, right? If you're not human, I don't care where you go to school. What? You ain't even human. What am I gonna educate you for, right? So we have to understand the necessity to advocate for a human right predetermines your ability to ask for civil rights. No one who's not human is going to be granted any type of civil right. You have to be human to be a citizen. Civilized, citizen, right? These are all in conversation with one another. So if you're not human, you don't have access to this. So it's important that we as a people begin to understand, especially African people, begin to understand the need to advocate for our human rights. Black Lives Matter, okay? I'm not talking about the movement. I'm not talking about the moment. I'm talking about the term. Black Lives Matter. What are you advocating for? Your human rights or your civil rights? What you asking for? What are you asking for when you say Black Lives Matter?
Human rights.
Human.
Absolutely. Because I'm saying my ability to live, my life, it matters. My ability to breathe, it matters. Those aren't civil necessities. Those are human necessities. If you can't breathe, you ain't here. If you can't breathe, you don't give a fuck about what you're about to eat. Your concern is breathing. But where we get tripped up, we attack these human rights issues as if they're civil rights issues. Black Lives Matter shouldn't be doing things the way that the civil rights movement did things. They're two different demands. It should be more rowdy and more raucous and more rebellious and more turned up because they're asking for people's human rights to be honored. You can march and do all that silly shit if you want to on some civil rights movement, okay. Because to me, where I'm eating is less of a priority than my ability to live. When we're dealing with human rights, anything's on the table in my capacity. Because you're not allowing me to be. Before El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, Malcolm X left this earth, before he transitioned to the realm of the ancestors, his objective was to take the United States before the United Nations for human rights violations. One more time. his job or his desire was to take the United States before the United Nations for human rights violations. His argument was the things that African people have to go through in this country violates their human rights. And if the United Nations is designed to step in when people's human rights are being violated, why aren't you stepping in for the Black folks in the United States? What's the difference? How can we be giving billions of dollars to Ukraine, right, to ensure that their human rights are maintained, because the way that Russia is infringing upon their human rights must be stopped, right? So they get billions upon billions upon billions of dollars. But our human rights have been violated since the start of this motherfucker. You don't even want to have the conversation around reparations. You see why the distinction between human rights and civil rights is very important? It drastically changes the whole nature of the discussion. What they do very masterfully is they make sure that any time that we talk about human rights violations, that we must address it from the standpoint of civil rights. Oh, well, the civil rights movement didn't do it like that. That's the appropriate way to do it. But here's the thing about rebellion, y'all. It's not supposed to be done the way that those who you are rebelling against says so. That defeats the whole purpose of a fucking rebellion. So again, when we're dealing with and we're discussing the need for human rights, there should be no criteria for how you express your grievance. You're going to tell me that this building burning is more important than my ability to breathe? Fuck that building. Chances are, all of them buildings is insured. Here's the thing, even if I have life insurance, that money ain't gonna do nothing for my son missing his father. That money ain't gonna do nothing for my daughter missing her father, my wife missing her husband. These are things that money can't repair. But we're so warped by money, we think, oh, well, shit, George Floyd family about to get paid. That's how we've been reduced to process this. Oh, well, lawsuit coming, so they're gonna be all right. No. These are things that are unrepairable, unpayable. Human rights. So, for, what's this? For Wednesday, give me 1 second, let me find that. For Wednesday, we'll do two things. You all had your code switching assignment. I want to revisit that conversation. Talk about how that went for you all, those who tried it. For those who are not familiar with your code switching assignment, your assignment was to not code switch when you normally do. But again, don't get fired and don't get your ass whooped, right? But try to push the borders of your need to be professional in certain spaces. We're going to try to do away with this notion of double consciousness that the boys lends us to. For next week's reading, for Wednesday's reading, for Wednesday, we'll read Marcus Garvey and Carter G. Woodson, the Pan-African Connection. So we're talking about Pan-Africanism a little bit through the lenses of Marcus Garvey and Carter G. Woodson. Any last minute questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, anything you just want to share, get off your chest? No?
Are we able to access copies of these recordings?
Yeah, I put them on the Canvas module. So for example, right here you see under week 4, it says course lecture 920.
Thank you.
That's the actual recording. Just kind of like be patient with me. I try to get at least like the week's worth of lecture uploaded at the same time. So I may not have today's up until maybe Thursday or Friday.
Okay, thank you. No rush.
Any other questions, any other comments, any other concerns? All right, y'all. Enjoy the rest of your day. I will see you all on Wednesday. Peace.
Thank you.
Francisco, you good?